I experience hypnagogia.
I experience hypnagogia.
I see people mostly. They will be standing there by my bed. I see sort of men, women, all backgrounds, all ages, sometimes in modern clothing, sometimes in period dress. They're always smiling at me, not in a creepy way, in a really loving, warm way. Like they're happy that I can see them. I see spiders sometimes, and I see geometric patterns, very intricate, elaborate, fantastical, colourful, beautiful, swirling, merging patterns on the ceiling, transposed across the curtains, always superimposed against the backdrop of my room. They all are. All the hallucinations are like that.
I see spiders mostly. Lots of spiders. It can be one, it can be multiple spiders. I see sometimes orbs floating around. Probably most often, I see objects that really are in my room behaving in a way that they should not be behaving.
Yeah, I'm Guy Leicester. I'm a professor of neurology and sleep medicine at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospitals in London.
So it's Professor Dominic Fitch, and I'm a Professor of Visual Psychiatry.
My name is Jackie McLeish. I'm a spiritualist medium and I'm from Glasgow.
My name is Marina and I'm a Jungian psychotherapist.
I'm Adam Powell. I'm a lecturer in medical humanities here at Durham University, and I work on religion, religious experience, mental health, that sort of thing.
Reverend Mother Alison Dunlop Shanes, a special area, supernatural religions. So I do talks on things to do with the supernatural in religions.
So Carl Gustav Jung, he was a Swiss psychiatrist. He worked in his early years, he worked closely with Freud. He considers the unconscious. So he was working together with Freud, but they had their disagreements, different points of view, and mostly because Jung focused mainly in the collective unconscious. And what is that? Well, the collective unconscious is based on archetypes. Archetypes are universal patterns of human behavior. Well, what is that? It's based on mythological motives. So Jung realized that even in different cultures, countries, epochs, he noticed some similarities. He noticed those patterns. So for example, Aphrodite, the goddess from Greek mythology. She could be very similar to Venus from Roman mythology, Inanna from the Sumeric mythology, or even Yansan from the African religious Ubanda. And they can show us, for example, how we love, how we experience our sexuality. So this is an archetype. Archetypes are very abstract ideas. It's not something we can see or touch, but it's how we experience life, how we see things, our perspectives, our points of view. So we all have that. This is our basis. But each one of us, we have unique experiences. So for example, just like our fingerprints, we all have one, right? But each one of us, we have our own. And dreams, they also have an archetypal basis. So as I've said before, we can have the same dream, but still be completely different things. And that's the basis of Jung's work.
What is Jungian psychology and how is it applied?
So Jungian psychology is a depth psychological approach. It's within all the psychodynamic approaches, so it considers the unconscious. In psychotherapy, if we have a Jungian approach, it's basically a perspective. So it's how we look at the case, we look at the patient, this individual in front of me. But there is no formula, no protocol. I don't give my patients a recipe, so you just follow this and it will be all sorted out. It's not how it works. So I'm here with this person in front of me. I'm hearing what is she struggling with, her issues, everything that's going on in her life. But for the patients, it doesn't really matter about the theory itself. So I don't talk about the concept and the theory. It's much more about the experiences and the Jungian perspective on it. So the perspective is with me. But obviously we work with dreams, so I always ask for dreams because they're like an X-ray of our inner life, like our inner landscapes. And dreams, they deepen and broaden the process, the analysis process, and that's why they're so important. They have a purpose, a meaning, and not only dream, every psychological experience in Jungian psychology, we see it as a purpose. What is it for in my life? What is it for that is happening with me? What does it mean in my life, you know? So I think that that's one of the bases in the Jungian approach and the method, and that's how I work.
So here's my question. Why spiders? Why people? Why geometric patterns? These three specific things keep coming up again and again. And I think that's interesting because people who have this sleep phenomena highly report seeing these three things in particular. You know, so why are they not seeing like the New York landscape or a narrative play out, or if it really was like a crossover of the imagination? Why is the imagination in different random people around the world seeing the same things? And this is something that Carl Jung was very interested in when he talks about the collective unconscious. He talks about there being an unconscious place where everybody draws from very similar kind of patterns, and he was interested in that because you could have a tribes person in Africa and a business person in India, and you know, there would be crossovers in some of the things that they were reporting in their dreams. So obviously he talked about the archetypes, and how that could mean something very different to you depending on your experience with it. So for example, the old lady archetype, also referred to as the sage or the hag or the grandmother figure. For some people, if they had a nice grandmother, that archetype could appear in their dreams in a positive way. But if you had a nasty, evil grandmother, then that archetype could appear in a much more malevolent way. So there is a very personal relationship with the archetypes, but that's not what the collective subconscious is about. The collective subconscious is what Carl Jung said was a place of patterns, global patterns amongst humans who would report seeing the same types of things, particularly in different periods of time. So like in the run-up to World War II, his patients would report seeing particular images, and of course they were influenced by what was going on in the real world, and that would seep into their collective unconscious or their personal unconscious and develop. So yeah, it's interesting, but with this, many of us see spiders, geometric patterns in people, and I have no idea why.
So can you give an example of someone from history who's reported seeing spirits or visions by their bed?
So there are many cases throughout history of individuals reporting seeing something of spiritual significance as they're drifting to sleep or as they're in their bed at night. Of course, we have entire kind of centuries-old folkloric traditions that are really based on what we now would call sleep paralysis, which is an overlapping kind of phenomenon with hypnagogic hallucinations. So if we think of something like the old hag tradition, the succubus and incubus, even Romanian vampire traditions around Nosferatu, for instance, these are all really based on the kind of felt presence of something in the room with you, usually a sense of dread, the feeling that perhaps something is resting on your chest. These are all typically kind of negative emotional experiences, but certainly wide, ubiquitous kind of traditions around that experience. Now, in terms of kind of more overtly religious or spiritual in the modern terms, experiences that would be more kind of positive in their emotional responses, we have many cases. I think of, for instance, 18th century accounts that we have from England of many lay people, churchgoers, who will report seeing Christ or seeing angels in the bedroom with them at night. And of course, in the 19th century in America, part of what's called the Second Great Awakening, where religious fervor was really spreading across the nation, we have many accounts from that period of similar phenomena. One really fascinating account from that period and in that place would be the account of Joseph Smith, who goes on to be the founder of Mormonism. But one of the two foundational moments in kind of the founding of that movement was an account he tells from when he was a teenager. And he's in his bedroom at night and he's praying, and suddenly a bright light fills the room. He says it's as bright as the noonday sun. And then, in his terms, a personage appears. Later, this is identified as an angel named Moroni. And this angel eventually tells him where he will find buried scriptures. And of course, as the story goes, those buried scriptures become the Book of Mormon. Okay, so this is a foundational moment for Mormonism, which is now a major kind of world religion. And this was an event that took place in his bedroom at night.
Would you say you are religious or spiritual or anything like that?
Not much. Spiritual, if anything, meditation, mindfulness, karma, just the energies of the world. What you put out, you get back, laws of attraction. But that's it. No traditional religious practice.
I am spiritual in that I do believe that there's a lot more happening than maybe we are aware of. I'm spiritual in that I do believe we are made up of me, this bed, this camera. We're all made up of the same building blocks, and there may be even more of those building blocks frozen through time and space. And yeah, you could say I'm spiritual in the sense of I think there's more than what meets the eye, than maybe what this three-dimensional body can perceive. Absolutely. What is spirituality?
For me, spirituality is a sense of being connected, maybe even connected to others, the earth, your own soul, maybe all. But I think spirituality has to come from within you. It can't be really taught. I think it has to be something that you really feel. And I really do think in this life that we're in, spirituality is really important, so we can start to understand each other that little bit more. So within my normal day job, as such, I am a spiritualist medium. So I connect with spirit and bring comfort to loved ones who've maybe lost someone. I maybe help them with that. I also do demonstrations, I work in churches, I teach students, and I do funerals and weddings as well as an officiant for the Spiritualist National Union. But I absolutely love my job. Is it hard? Yes. But it is a very worthy job, bringing comfort to many.
From a more kind of naturalistic angle, though, there's also a long history of scholars and thinkers who have observed a link between the genesis of religions or new movements and dreams. So as far back as the 1st century BC, the Roman poet Lucretius, he notes that, it's really the way in which we have our dreams populated by the spirits or by deceased ancestors, that we then come to posit that there are supernatural entities or that there's a soul that goes on beyond the life of the physical body. And then all the way down to kind of late 19th century, you have Edward Burnett Tylor, who's one of the founding fathers of anthropology, and he posits this idea that he calls animism, which is very much the same idea, that basically what you have is people dreaming, and in their dreams they feel a presence in the room, or they see a deceased relative or loved one, and then it's based on that they then go on to posit that there are different types of supernatural entities, that there are angels, that there are spirits, and that it's really from our dream life that we then create a kind of religious life.
You mentioned earlier you thought you had like a ghost in the house. Is the jury out on that for you with things like ghosts? Where do you stand on that?
I do believe in ghosts, spirits, energies. I'm not convinced I have the senses to pick up on them as much as I wish I did. It definitely, when I experienced that figure standing in my room, like I said, my first thought was, oh my gosh, this house is haunted. We just moved into a haunted house. But then the logical side of me was like, nope, that was probably a hypnagogic episode and not a spirit.
I do believe in ghosts. I don't know what they are. I don't know where they come from, where they reside, where they're hanging out. But I do believe in them. I have had plenty of experiences to back that up. So I won't go into them all here, but I do. And I don't know if it's residual matter from another plane. I don't know if it is the residual energy of a person that's been here but now is somewhere else. I don't know, because I've not travelled there. I haven't seen that, but I do believe in ghosts, yeah.
What is the space-time overlap and how might that manifest in our reality?
Well, ultimately, we feel that we exist in this reality right now, but we can tap into other realities. And the alpha frequency, which you get right before you're falling asleep, is a way to tap into that reality. So what are we talking about? Well, we're saying that where we are now and what we think is around us actually is only one, we'll say it's really a small aspect of the fuller, greater reality of life. There are beings, many people have seen ghosts sometimes. You know, where are they? Well, they're not in this 3rd or 4th dimensional reality, but they're still in our space in a certain sense sometimes, if you see them. In other times, there's other things that people can see precognition. A lot of people know things before they happen. One of my experiences was the fact that I had someone working for me. And so in my kind of dream semi-state, I heard, well, you know, Julie doesn't work here anymore. And I didn't know why, because Julie was absolutely fine. But about 2 months later, her husband got sick and said, Julie, you got to quit work. I need your help. You know, I mean, these are other realities that are starting to cross into our state of awareness. Now, in addition to that, we believe there's vast amounts of reality. People do see angels. People do see beings that come into their room at night. Usually it's a positive. And in fact, I think depending on how we think, and if we do a little prayer at night, doesn't hurt to bring in the right energies around us. Because if we're negative all the time, we're going to attract negativity. If we're positive, if we're meditative, or if we're prayerful, we're going to bring in those positive energies. And they are waiting and here to help. I've talked to people who have had near-death experiences. And when they hear that about what this reality is all about, they often say, when we listen to our, we could say our higher self or those spiritual guides that are around us, the spiritual guides on the other side all kind of applaud. They're saying, hey, they're listening. They know, you know, we know a little bit more than they do. We're trying to help them. Please. You know, that's what we want to, you know. And sometimes you just want to know things that we can't physically know with our logical mind. We can be informed. So a space-time overlap is really where the other side reaches into our reality and we can experience and know it.
Space-time overlap means that our line of reality, our linear reality, is able to work in conjunction with other timelines of reality. So one universe in practical language can superimpose itself on our immediate universe. In practical language, it would be like the system of epsilon bodies or Arcturus coming into our galactic plane. One galaxy interconnects with another galaxy. One plane of existence in psychology can superimpose itself on another, just as one psychologist shares his notes with his patient, and that patient shares his notes with some other third party. So space-time overlap for us in the Keys of Enoch means that the greater intelligence is now preparing us as a human race to accept the fate that those who've gone beyond us in evolution can come back in some fashion through vibration, through cosmic harmonics, and superimpose mentally ideas, thoughts, and mental pictures that we can assimilate and sort out our problems by using new insights of science, psychology, and cosmology. In essence, we are destined to be citizens of the future by virtue of this space-time overlap that can be very constructive, but it also can be very haunting for those who are unprepared to accept the fact that we're not alone in the universe. And there are others that have gone beyond our planetary quagmire of having all these problems, but suddenly we realize there are new players in the universe. So we call this the angelic dimension, that superimposes itself or makes itself manifest, and through which interconnection we begin to grow up and be more positive, more life-giving, more loving, and ultimately more futuristic in claiming our cosmic reality.
What might be out there, and are we alone?
We believe that we are a very small part of a greater reality. Not only because we exist on a very small planet around a mediocre solar system, there probably are what's popularly called now extraterrestrial beings. But in addition to that, we say there's also extracelestial beings, which are beings that are kind of spirit guides. Many of them had been here before and are here to try to help us. They resonate with us and they say, hey, this is part of our spiritual work to try to help humanity as well. And then we feel what we call ultra-terrestrial intelligences and what the ancients had called angelic forces. So there's many levels of intelligence, and it's certainly the positive ones. And because they're not all positive in this local life space, it's pretty much like us on this planet. A lot of people are trying to help, other people really don't care, they just go around their business, and some are really trying to, control. So that's what this local reality is all about. But when we go into those higher dimensions connected with the angelic or ultra-terrestrial forces, they really do want us to listen, to be more peaceful, more loving, more compassionate. So this is very important. And I think if more of humanity would tap into this higher nature, the whole planet would change. And that's what we're really looking forward to. To know who we truly are, to know our potential of being able to be almost cross-dimensional, fifth-dimensional beings, multi-dimensional beings. And with that said, then this whole planet can be more peaceful, more understanding, more, because once you understand where someone else is coming from, you start understanding their level of soul growth. And that helps tremendously in understanding how to interact with them, what to expect from them. People get mad at other people. And they get mad at other people because they don't understand where that other person is coming from. Even if it's a total different psychology, you've got to have an understanding. And I think in the higher forces, the higher worlds, they can help us with that higher understanding. When people really see the higher beings that can come into their bedrooms even at night, it's a different vibration. It's an overwhelming sense of love. Because these beings are introducing us to not only who they are, but how we can relate to them. I believe love is a very interesting factor. It's really more of a field, almost like tied into the consciousness field. It's not something that just generates from me because I love you. I'm tapping into that and I'm sharing that love that I experience with those around me. But these beings, when they appear in your room at night, it is a whole different reality. Sometimes even lights, go around them. Sometimes you just feel almost electrified because they come from a different reality. And fortunately for some who can see them and feel them, they want to make themselves known. What's important when people start to fall asleep, their brain frequencies, and all the different brain frequencies work all the time, but they get heightened at certain phases. And the alpha state is an amazing state where it literally is a meditative state. So when you're falling asleep, right before you go to sleep, you get into that alpha frequency. And that is that state that allows you to activate parts of your inner self to see and know more. So you can see amazing, I think Salvador Dali did a lot of his images and a lot of the surrealistic paintings he did, and other artists are from things that they saw in this alpha state. But ultimately, you can also even know more about yourself. You can know more about what's going on around you. You can even try to project what's going to happen to me tomorrow. Let me feel that energy. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Do I have to protect myself? All these different aspects. But also, of course, there are those who you can tap into that are also trying to give you insights.
Yes, my wife and I have met people of all professional backgrounds who have had, should we say, very creative states of consciousness, coming from that time period where we relax at night to the beginning of the day cycle. This tells us whether it's in the delta state or the theta state. These are the lower vibratory fields of what is measured by neuropsychologists and parapsychologists, that there is awakening where we can pass through what is called the alpha state, the state of higher thinking, to even the gamma state, where the Tibetan lamas and mystics register a higher consciousness and experience of what they've gained through the night cycle. The Christian traditionals will call this rebirth, reconnection, reawakening, or the eureka experience of waking up and realizing vast realms of life exist around us. We've just been mentally dumbed down not to understand this, except the night cycle suddenly awakens us to these images, these realities. Of course, we have to take them within the context that these are subjective realities, and they have to be matched by objective science measurement and consciousness attunement. But we're living at a time, Eileen Garrett, for example, was studied by my colleague, Dr. Andrei Puharich, and she could actually see things into the future before they happen by feeling the vibrations. And so it is not simply seeing passively hypnagogic images or images of ghosts or other realities that are not physical, but feeling the vibrations and using these vibrations in a creative and meaningful way. My bottom line here is we must be thankful that we can see other realities and use them constructively if we take a higher path of positive association, which means we should keep a notebook by our bed or some type of recording device so that when we awake, we can record what we have experienced and then learn through these sessions of how we spend 1/3 of our life in the night cycle, where some of us can be taken to universities or academies in other dimensional worlds and learn that we cannot learn what is in the day cycle because we live in constricted situations of poverty or the inability to go to advanced educational centers. We can learn at night constructively if we use these what I will call bioholographic downloads constructively. This is the basis of what is now taking place in the United States. It has been taking place for the last 2 years, what is called disclosure, the recognition by government scientists, not only from the American government, but from the British, from the French, the Brazilian, the Mexican, and other governments, that our astronauts and technicians in the space program and other professionals have recorded and documented events that violate space-time or thermodynamics as it is defined. Life forms that are not human, that go at excessive speeds, that violate the laws of the conservation of matter and can manifest and demanifest before our eyes, showing that they are working with a different level of science, a different level of consciousness, a different level of meaning. In short, we are waking up to the fact that the, shall we say, beings of space represent what we could call the super-angelic, the ultra-terrestrial, as it were, coming back to help us speed up or slow down in terms of our problem solving, what we face. This is really the criteria of our work at the Academy for Future Science, accepting the fact that the human being is a natural cosmophysical reality. In other words, what we see here also exists in the other universe. Meaning beings from space that look like us, that do not surprise us, because wherever we look with telescopes in space, we see the same basic building blocks of chemistry and biological conditions that favor life throughout the greater universe. Disclosure then is the teaching that brings together the higher evolution and the human evolution, so we can transit from being humankind into space kind without losing our sanity or having a destruction of civilization, that suddenly we realize we're working with superior intelligence, that is to say, intelligence from the 5th dimension, even the 6th dimension, that works through information, mathematics, and vibration, shaping the reality game that we accept and realize is not the end game. To the contrary, we began to realize in new science or new psychological humility that the ancient philosophers, whether East or West, were correct in saying that we are surrounded by higher realms of intelligence, called in ancient India the avatars and mahavatars. In the Judeo-Christian experience of the Western world, angels and archangels, these are not just abstract words, but these are beings of intelligence, beings of education, beings of a super science that supersedes the mechanical aspects of evolution and the, shall we say, negativity that has come in largely in the 19th and 20th century, that we are the only ones in the universe, we're the only game, and what we can only measure is the true science. When we realize that science itself is being redefined through the higher senses that we are beginning to understand, such as remote viewing, remote healing, remote communication. These are the senses that the ancient writers of the scriptures refer to as the gifts of spirit or the Holy Spirit. So we're realizing besides the normal three-dimensional game, there is a fifth, sixth, and even seventh, eighth dimensions of knowledge that we're working with. Much of this has been restricted to the top scientists and not available to the public, but some of this is now being made available through a variety of books, such as the work that we're doing in conjunction with top scientists throughout the world and the disclosure programs taking place throughout the world. So all of this really comes down to a greater roadmap of where we are as a human evolution. We're being contacted with what government scientists are calling extraterrestrials, those beyond the confines of Mother Earth. And then above this, there's another category we call extracelestials. They're simply forms of energy that take on many shapes or forms without technology. And even beyond this, there are what we call the ultra-terrestrials, which would equate to what the ancients called the avatars or archangels, beings of spiritual importance that govern us through a cosmic law. We would call also a cosmic gospel of good news, Christ-like forms of intelligence that works with divine source of the creation story that begins to recycle, as it were, the Adam and Eve story on a higher level of meaning. So what we believe now is happening with the problems of Mother Earth, with the indigenous elders considered the death of Mother Earth, the violation of the environment, that we're receiving cosmic instructions or knowledge and spiritual knowledge and insights for what Isaiah the prophet in chapter 65 and 66 calls the new heavens and the new earth. We are being given knowledge that we cannot deny, that we are not alone, we're being visited, but it's for us to figure out whether we want to take the high road or simply the low road of going on with a materialistic realm, of using the plastic credit card, getting as much as we can in the material world and passing away, which is a foolish commentary on the evolutionary cycle that brings us into the greater reality of the gifts of mind, gifts of spirit, and the fantastic Christ-like nature that we have and can use in a way of enlightening the world by virtue of being humbly aware that we have cosmic family.
And there are, of course, really interesting findings from kind of contemporary research around religion and hypnagogia. So, for one, we're finding that even if you look at archival accounts of religious experiences, or if you talk to people in contemporary religious or spiritual settings about their kind of anomalous sensory experiences, that in both cases, it's roughly a third, very consistently. It's about a third of those experiences that would fit the phenomenology of what we would now call hypnagogic hallucinations. So on the one hand, I think that's really quite interesting that there's kind of this whole subset of spiritual and religious experiences that we also would deem in a kind of different discourse hypnagogic hallucinations. But we've also found in some contemporary research that there's an interesting link between what those experiences are like and whether or not they become spiritually significant to the one who had the experience. So in particular, we found that when you start looking at all sorts of different spiritual experiences, those that take place as someone is falling asleep or waking up, those that are auditory and reported as being very clearly externally auditory, and those that are ambiguous in their meaning. So the person reports that at that time, they couldn't make sense of it. They weren't sure what this meant. That when those three things kind of intersect, they often come to deem those experiences spiritual or religious when they don't deem other similar but slightly different hypnagogic experiences spiritual or religious.
Do you think there is a connecting force between the ancient world and the modern one? And if so, what is that?
Well, I believe that the ancient world and the present world and the future world really all link together. So that's extremely important. And there are sacred places around the world which are more intensified than others. That's why people like to go to the Middle East, to Egypt or to Israel. People like to go to the pyramids of Mexico because these pyramids are not happenstance. They were placed at key locations on the planet to augment that alpha state. And when we've worked in these areas, we've gone into the temples and we've used actually music. And music and harmonics will actually augment your own state of consciousness. So you're able to bring forth a greater vibratory frequency. There's an ancient temple called Tikal in Guatemala. It's known as the city of sound. And someone could be standing at the very ground in the central plaza, and another person can be at the top of a pyramid. And just like I'm talking to you, you can hear the voice. The ancients understood the importance of vibration. And so from the ancient times to the present times, we can activate the sacred sites around the globe. You can see how people who had an interest in the past, say ancient Egypt, or even that of the Far East, that opens their minds to understanding that there's something more. Sadly, I think with humanity right now, and this is why your documentary is so important, is many people don't think there's anything more than what's going on with them right now. And unfortunately, a lot of the younger people also think this is all there is. So the most important message to get out that the ancients also had is that there is so much more to life. There is extraterrestrial levels of intelligence. There's the higher angelic levels of intelligence. All these levels of intelligence exist, and there is more that we can connect with. It's not just all here. So if you understand that, you're willing to work a little harder in your higher consciousness field to tap into that, to know the real purpose of life.
Clearly, there's a connecting force. When I was working with the Zulu shaman Credo Mutwa in South Africa, we'd often go to the healing stones, and he could feel from the vibrations of those who had been there in medical healing, who had put their body next to the healing stones, that there were certain vibratory vibrations. Others that we have worked with the indigenous tribes in Brazil and South America have felt that in sacred grounds, usually marked by what we would call stone circles, that there was energy they could step in and out of because of the permanence or semi-permanence of energies of great healers that was left behind. So we know there's a connection between past, present, future. We're part of a continuum that is very subtle. It takes people of mental sensitivity and scientific training to understand and appreciate, but it's really an expression of what we call acoustical physics, that everything is in vibration. Everything has a vibratory or musical signature, and the more aware we are, the more musical we are aware, we then can enjoy how we can go into the thought patterns of old patterns of our presence through our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, by going back to their habitats or the places of great master teachers, such as the room that Mozart used to compose, or Einstein used at Caltech to think, or even the Holy Land in Israel, the high places, the tombs of the patriarchs, where we can actually feel the presence of the Shekinah, an expression of the divine. So all of this is important if we realize the importance of the now, why we're here now, not to be lost in the past or dreamers in the far-fetched future, but to realize that we are ciphers, we're catalysts of bringing past, present together so that the future can be more meaningful by virtue of positive vibrations. Now, in situations where there have been wars, massacres, such as in the United States during the Civil War, or in England and Scotland, the War of the Roses, or in France in Spain during the Inquisition, repression of spiritual thinking, of course, we realize that some of these areas are ill-disposed to positive thinking. So we must adjust our creative capacity to associate ourselves with those positive areas of the past and avoid negative areas, in my logic. If we don't have any connection with the past as we prepare for the future, we recognize that we are part of a much larger story of life. We call the book of life. The Greeks call it in the New Testament the bibliothesoes, where we turn the pages of history and learn from the pages of history that God has given us the importance of a higher mind and consciousness. To write our names in vibration charismatically through the musical vibrations of what some would call the higher experience of ecstasy. And Psalm 23, where King David writes, through the valley of the shadow, we realize we can pass through this, we can have our head anointed with oil. The cup runneth over, and we place before the problematic world, or the quote-unquote the enemy, a table of discussion where we share the new good news or the bread of life, a higher teaching, a higher purpose. We don't live in the construct of a mythological past or even a psychological reality. We put this together to live in the synergistic presence of importance of the now, and to the creativity of the now, and the divine spark of the now. And thus we are given a happiness and joy of understanding the glimpse of a greater life that we are part of.
Edwin Abbott's Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions, was written in 1884 and is a satirical novella using a two-dimensional world inhabited by geometric shapes to critique Victorian-era social hierarchies, class structures and gender roles. Narrated by a square, the story explores higher dimensions and mathematical concepts, ultimately advocating for open-mindedness regarding new ideas. In Carl Sagan's Cosmos series, he does an excellent demonstration to explain the fourth dimension. This explanation brought me much comfort. It was one of the first things that for me, personally, really resonated. I was that square, let me explain. Flatland depicts a realm stitched flat like silk, no height, no depth. Now, imagine these flat beings are drifting across a two-dimensional plane. They know only surface, only shadow. To them, above is a myth and within is a riddle without an answer. Here is Square, just going about her business and goes in and out of her bedroom each day. Here she goes. Close the door. Now, imagine a visitor from beyond, a creature, in our case, a potato, not bound by their plane, but sculpted in 3 dimensions. It reaches in, not with violence, but with grace. Its touch, a revelation. To the flat ones, this being is divine. It sees through walls they cannot fathom. The square can only see the potato's points of contact. And we'll show this via this paint marking. Imagine, if you will, that the potato decides to come and say hello to the square one night as she's just sleeping in her bedroom. Because our friend is 3-dimensional, the first point of contact might be something that looks a little like this. Now, the square is confused. It says, what is this shape? But as our friend, the potato, descends through Flatland, the square will be able to see a cross-section of this 3-dimensional creature. So rather than just seeing this, it'll then see something that looks a little bit like this. And it looks mystical. The square's confused. These are objects that are appearing in the room, and the appearance of the potato changes as they transcend layer by layer. The square thinks it has gone mad. The potato is trying to reassure the square that it is very real. And so one night it makes contact with the square, which lifts it up from its page, and suddenly it shows the square the curvature of space, things that it's never seen before from a completely new angle. At first the square is scared, but after a time it realizes that it is seeing the contents of their own bedroom, their bed, the floor plan of the house, everything from a completely new dimension. As the square comes back from this astral projection experience, it feels different. It starts to tell the other flatland creatures what it saw. They take pity on the square, pat him on the head, and call her crazy. I believe we are those flat beings, but our prison is three-dimensional. So we can walk through rooms and, we open doors, we see surfaces, but we cannot go beyond our own dimension. Dimensions, plural. Dimensions that we already know exist. You don't have to see the shifting of tectonic plates up close to know that they cause tsunamis. We see the tsunami, that's the part we can see. The underseen, underground earthquake is the root connection. Doesn't mean it's not happening just because we can't see it up close. Somewhere, curled in the folds of reality, a fourth dimension waits. Not just a direction, but a liberation. A fourth dimensional traveller could see our world like a sculpture, every moment laid bare. And we're not powerless. Our minds are not flat. Through sound, frequencies, mathematics, and emotion, we stretch beyond our senses. We sketch the impossible. We dream in dimensions we cannot touch. And in those visions, I see holographic cherubs and surreal spiders. I perceive emotion and geometry. Together, humans can make the invisible visible. So let us keep reaching. Let us keep exploring space with thought, because somewhere, just beyond the veil, other dimensions are watching. Thank you.
So I've had experiences that cover a wide range of what you might call paranormal phenomena. That, I suppose, is because I have some psychic awareness. It wasn't just because I was going to psychic development circles. Some things happened prior to going to psychic development circles. So for whatever reason, without knowing, I had become more psychically aware. It's probably through meditation. Because in psychic development circles, you do use meditation to open yourself up to getting messages from the other side, psychic mediumship and things like that. So I have psychic awareness, I can do mediumship. I'm not particularly good at it, like I've not been doing it for years. These are things that I can tap into, tune into in the waking state, as well as the sleeping state. When things happen there, that's less out of my control. They're spontaneous. There's no rhyme or reason for when or why they might happen. And they can be quite frightening experiences because they can involve sleep paralysis too.
So it's important when we're sitting here now and we really want to know more about what's going to happen in the future. Well, we can project ourselves into that higher time line, that matrix line of what I would call 8th dimensional space, to get an idea of what's going to happen in the future. Again, we all have free will. It's so important to realize that. And most importantly, regarding the future, that we all are somewhat empowered to make a difference. If we feel the future is just going to happen without us, whether we do anything or do nothing, whatever, then we take ourselves out of the equation. That's not why we're here. We are all, in a certain sense, emissaries of peace. And if we put that energy out, we can influence what's taking place around us, especially. If we do it collectively, we can even influence the whole planet. And even if you don't see some peace treaty being signed, when you do your prayer, it doesn't mean that you're not helping a young child in the midst of danger. When you're projecting your energies there, seeing a white dove there, seeing angelic forces over areas of conflict, these are all things we can do to help mitigate, if not neutralize, negativity in the future. So it's important that we see that we are empowered to make a difference and that we use our positive energy to make those changes as much as we can.
Yeah, the future, of course, is being defined by the collective consciousness. The future is what we as a collective humanity, shall we say, interconnect with in the context of the first quarter of the 21st century, is recognizing cosmic cultures. Cosmic intelligence is here interacting with us in a real sense. I've seen documents from high levels of experts in other governments in my travels throughout the world, and the indigenous elders I've spoken to, the Hopi, the Shavanti in Brazil and other cultures in Mexico, have said that Mother Earth is crying. The space cultures called the star nations are coming back, and that interconnection between those who've gone beyond where we are on this level of evolution, those who are coming back from the higher evolution to meet us as we go up the ladder of evolution through a higher vibration, will give us a positive consequence. I do not want to emphasize the negative spin-offs that may occur in world cultures or political cultures that are dominant and deny the spiritual reality of the infinite way. But there are those situations that could be very unpleasant, as we have seen in more recent times in the 20th century, where whole cultures go under because they have adapted a negative way of thinking. We must, as a collective humanity, see the positive side, make the positive jump into the fifth, sixth, and seventh dimension. And by the way, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the European scientists who've worked out the mathematics of these higher dimensions. So if you go to our website, keysofenoch.org, you will see some of our scientific papers, at least some books that you can draw upon, but more importantly, the music. That's the essential part, because without the music of awakening the inner self, the inner dynamic of how the heart connects with the mind of the heart, mind and heart together connects with other parts of the body, we're just simply working with facts and figures knowledge that doesn't do much. Why? Because the reality game is controlled by those who have the ability to work only with the technical elites. We must be able to work with the spiritual, the metaphysical, the philosophical, and the sociological dynamics of life. So what I'm saying, and Desiree and I would agree with me, we're working with a collective consciousness, working with all of the basic learning tools. The whole spectrum of knowledge is being influenced and changed by new breakthroughs of how we are not alone in the universe, and how science, physical science, is going back to understand metaphysical science and the higher, shall we say, realms that did guide us historically in the movements of thought through the great mystics, the great thinkers, such as John the Divine in the New Testament, such as Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century, and down through the ages, both in East and West. We've had the great thinkers, the great mystics, the great poets who have guided us. We have to focus on a much greater reality of futurism, being a collective futurism, overcoming the handicap of negative thought or limited thought, that we're the only game in town, the only living, thinking reality of the greater universe.
Well, I think a visual hallucination is really the perception of any visual image that isn't actually there in reality. It's really a very general term. When you start talking about sleep, there are particular hallucinations that people will often have at the point of drifting off to sleep or waking up. But in many ways, even when we dream, that is a form of hallucination.
So I'm a visual psychiatrist, so I clinically get sent people that have but strange visual experiences, and most commonly they're visual hallucinations, which is technically it's seeing something that's not actually there. But when we come to, I'm going to say, sleep-related hallucinations or hypnagogia, it becomes slightly more complicated because, of course, it's absolutely normal phenomenon to have pictures in your dreams, or pictures when you're asleep, which is what we call a dream. And so even though that is a hallucination, you're seeing something that's not really there in your dream world, that's not clinically what we mean by a visual hallucination. So you have to be awake to have a visual hallucination. And there are these strange transitional areas where you're kind of at the edges of sleep, where it sometimes becomes a little bit difficult to distinguish between the two. And the final thing I want to say is that we need to make a distinction here between visual imagery. So these are experiences that you conjure up yourself in what we call your mind's eye. So we can all close our eyes, or even with our eyes open, and imagine pictures of objects and things that we've seen, etc. But the difference here is that we have a sense of ownership of those phenomena. So you choose to conjure up in your mind's eye a picture of something like whatever it is that you're imagining. Whereas in a visual hallucination, there's no sense of ownership. It's something that is imposed upon you, that you are like a spectator. You're looking at it like it was a film projected in front of you, or something that's occurring in front of you in the real world. There's no sense of this is coming from within me.
We tend to separate out, and it's slightly arbitrary, hallucinations into simple visual hallucinations, and those can include things like colours or blobs or flashing lights, and then there are what we term complex visual hallucinations, and these are usually things like people or animals, something that's much more formed and has much more of a feel of reality about it.
So we like to classify things in medicine, and it's the same as for hallucinations. So one way of classifying them is the kind of sense that it's in, so whether you hear something or feel something, etc. But within visual ones, we tend to divide them into simple phenomena. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they're visually that simple, but what they lack is a formed object or thing in them. So the simple ones are like coloured blobs, maybe. It can be zigzag lines or little maybe shapes of some sort. And it can build up into a more complex or geometrical pattern or lattice work or something like that, which is kind of on the borderline between simple and complex. But complex means formed objects, so it could be a face, it could be a whole body, a person, it could be an object, it could be an extended kind of landscape scene that you're looking at with lots of activities going on. So those would all fall into this kind of complex brand, and it's really the distinction is made because the types of condition that lead to simple are slightly different to the types of condition that can lead to complex.
So when we talk about hallucinations in a psychiatric context, so these are people with serious mental health issues, one of the hallmarks of that is that people lose insight into what it is they're experiencing. What that means essentially is that they are unable to discriminate their hallucination from reality. Whereas in some of the neurological disorders that we see, and indeed some of the sleep disorders that we see, people may well be scared, terrified by what they're seeing, but ultimately they know that those hallucinations are not real. And so insight really describes being able to discriminate reality from the hallucination.
So when you see something in front of you, you have a visual hallucination experience, your first response is that it must be real. You know, we believe what we see. Our brains are constructed in the sense that we believe the ultimate truth is what's out there. But obviously there are some things that can occur that you can sort of maybe work out that can't be real, or the situation I'm in, this can't be happening, etc. So insight is all about that kind of understanding that the experience that you're having is not real. It's something that is, depending on the way you're conceiving of it, whether it's constructed by your brain or whatever else you think it is. But you understand that this is not an object or something that's happening in the world in front of you. Now, that having insight doesn't mean to say that it's there instantly. It's something that you can learn to understand. And for many people, the first response is always that they're frightened, or that they start because they've seen something that they're not expecting to be there, and at that moment, at that instant, they think it's real, etc. But they can learn to understand that it isn't. And then there are sort of grades of insight where you really believe it's real at the time, but later on, when you come to think about it, or you have a chance to discuss it with other people, then you come to realize that actually it didn't really happen, etc. So that's a kind of partial or fluctuating insight, but at the time it happened, you believed it to be real. And in the types of people that I might see in my clinic, that might mean that they phone the police because they really think there's someone sitting in the room in front of them. But later on, when they come to see me in the clinic, they realise, no, of course it wasn't really happening at the time. But this is something that they've gained insight afterwards, not at the time.
What are some of the common causes of visual hallucinations?
Obviously, when you start talking about hallucinations, a lot of people think about psychiatric disorders. But actually, in a neurological context, there are many reasons why people may hallucinate. Migraine is probably one of the commonest causes of visual hallucinations. So when people have what's termed a migraine aura, which is when abnormal electrical activity occurs within the part of the brain called the visual cortex, they may well see flashing lights, they may see zigzag lines or other disturbance of vision, and these meet the criteria for visual hallucinations. Other potential causes include epilepsy arising in the visual part of the brain, and indeed any neurological structural cause. So for example, a tumour, a bleed, or any changes in the blood flow to that visual part of the brain can also result in visual hallucinations. Some of the other potential causes are problems with the eye itself, so sometimes a detached retina or some other problem with the back of the eye. And indeed, we know that one other form of visual hallucination is something called Charles Bonnet syndrome. So when people lose vision, then due to eye disease, then actually sometimes the visual cortex generates visual hallucinations almost as a compensatory mechanism. But in the field of sleep medicine, one of the commonest causes for visual hallucinations is what are termed hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations. These are visual hallucinations that occur in that transition between wake and sleep as you drift off to sleep, or between sleep and wake as you wake up.
So in the clinical world, when I get referred people who are seeing things that are not there, there are a whole range of different kind of clinical problems that could be leading to that. And so part of my role is to work out, which exactly what cause of the hallucinations there might be. And there's a whole set of disorders that really only affect older people. So they would be what we call neurodegenerative diseases. So that could be the brain itself has got some kind of degenerative disease, and the things like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. So all of these in different ways can lead to visual hallucinations. But there's a whole set of other disorders where the degeneration is in the eye, nothing to do with the brain at all. And the term that we use to describe that is Charles Bonnet syndrome. And it's because Charles Bonnet first described it back in the 18th century, and he was a kind of, he actually started off as a botanist, an insectology. He was a proper sort of scientist as we would see them today, but then he ended up doing philosophy and psychology, and he described hallucinations in his grandfather, who was visually impaired. So that's why we call it Charles Bonnet syndrome. So the Charles Bonnet syndrome is different because that is nothing to do with the brain. There's no implication that you've got a degenerative brain condition. And when I started in this field, we used to say it was a disease, or it was a problem of the elderly. But actually, over the last 10 years, what we're really realising is it can happen at any age. So anyone with eye disease, whether you're a very young child or a 90-year-old person, you still are at risk of having Charles-Bonnet syndrome. And it's not everyone gets it, it's a relatively minor proportion of people. Now, so that's the kind of the main clinical problems that I get to see, but there's a whole host of other conditions, particularly for the hypnagogic hallucinations, where the problem is more to do with synchronizing rhythms in sleep. And there are sleep conditions where one of the symptoms is that you have visual hallucinations, but these are around the margins of sleep. So typically you don't get those types of hallucinations when you're fully awake in the day, which is the case with Charles-Bonnet syndrome or Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease. These are hallucinations that occur while we might be sitting as we are now, although it's usually not when you're alert and doing stuff. It's usually when you're sitting alone and maybe listening to the radio or in a relaxed state when they occur. And that's an interesting link actually between the hypnagogic hallucinations. But so hypnagogic ones are very specifically at the margins of sleep, and they can occur in much younger age groups. And again, they don't imply there's anything seriously wrong with you here. It's if you like, it's a normal phenomena in the sense that there's not it doesn't indicate a significant neurological or mental illness, but it's not normal in the sense that not everyone has it. So it's something that, it's a part of the normal variation of who we are as people and how our brains work. And so a kind of variant of normal is that people have these hallucinations around the margins of sleep. And the last thing I should say is that if we're talking specifically about visual experiences, these are not symptoms of serious mental illness. So something like schizophrenia, you do get hallucinations, but they're typically voices and auditory, what we call auditory verbal hallucinations. And you can get visions and you can get visual hallucinations, but never alone. So if you're just having purely visual experiences, that sort of rules out the possibility that this is schizophrenia or a kind of serious mental illness like that.
And can you tell me, like with your eyesight, do you wear glasses or contacts? Do you notice a difference in what you can see, like with or without your glasses, if you do wear them?
Yeah, so I do wear prescription, usually contacts, glasses as a backup. I do take my contacts out when I sleep. And it's strange because when I am in the middle of an episode, it seems like my vision is clear. Normally, without my lenses, if I'm looking across my bedroom, everything is a blur. But during the hallucination, without my lenses, it doesn't seem like things are as blurry as they would be when I'm awake.
Perfect. And that's another consistency, and that's another one that just blows my mind.
Right?
I don't know
and that's
why.
why I'm like, are my eyes even open?
Lots of people, yeah, they kind of they got like 20/20 almost when it's happening, but then when they wake up, it's strange.
So, in part one of this documentary, I place quite a strong emphasis on the importance, for me anyway, as the filmmaker, to try and destigmatize hallucinations in general, and to do this by actually talking about them, what they are, how they differ. And the reason that I want to do that is not only to take away that stigma for people in every classification of the matter, but it's in a hope that I can actually maybe help, if not that person, signpost themselves, maybe a friend or a family member or a colleague or somebody else, maybe point that person in a particular direction through having a little bit more information, maybe information they already had, but maybe some new information about the difference between hallucinations. The hope is that by having the discussion, we can actually help people with earlier signposting, with earlier assistance, I think we would be better placed in life in general if we tried to approach things a little bit more in a preventative manner. I want to be able to have this discussion, but I'm trying to be very, very careful about how I word it as well. My emphasis here is that we need to take everything on a case-by-case basis, but having a good fundamental understanding of hallucinations and the difference in hallucinations might go a little way to help in that as well. It takes a village, it takes a whole community to help people and stay on top of these things.
Where I come from is Charles-Bonnet syndrome in the eye disease state. So, but there are some important observations that may be relevant for the hypnagogic state as well. So the commonest hallucinations are actually simpler, or at least those pattern type things. So that's a very common type of hallucination that you have in Charles-Bonnet syndrome. And then a disembodied face and figures are relatively common. They're not the most common thing, but they're relatively common. But the important thing, important observation here is that they are usually not memory. They're not specific people or faces that you know, specific people that you've seen. The patterns aren't specific things that you've been looking at, etc. So these are not memories in the sense that it's something that you've seen, that your brain has stored and it's reactivating them. They're more like things that your brain is constructing from the machinery in the brain that it uses to process faces or figures or patterns or things like that. So now that is different to other types of hallucination. So in some disorders, like in Parkinson's disease or in dementia, the hallucinations there are of memory. There's a link to the memories. There are hallucinations of relatives that have deceased, or people that you may have known or know now, or in the context of dementia, you may still believe that your parents are alive and see your parents, etc. So that's a very different kind of mechanism behind it. But these ones in Charles-Bonnet syndrome, and I think to some extent in hypnagogia as well, they're not necessarily things that you would instantly say, oh yeah, I've seen that before, or I know what this is. You might make connections with it, etc. So they have that sense of being slightly strange in the sense that you have no idea why your brain would produce that, or why you're hallucinating that particular thing. And the patterns are all very stereotyped. So when you get people to draw the patterns, often it's a very similar pattern amongst different people. And again, there may be some link between the way the visual parts of our brains are constructed, or the way that they deal with processing the world around us, that means that these particular types of pattern are generated when the brain kind of fires off and gives us these hallucinated experiences.
Do you have a story or an anecdote about a famous medium spiritualist who harnessed their skills and were able to help others, or solve a problem, or encourage harmony and creativity, something like that? Anything?
I'd like to tell you about somebody, but they're not a famous medium. They're actually a really good human being. Her name is Trisha Robertson. She's a psychical researcher and has done that for over 30 years. She worked with Archie Roy at Glasgow University, and they looked really deeply into testing mediums and understanding their capabilities. I have personally worked with Trish, and she's amazing. Not only has she proven pretty much outright that what we do is legitimate, that we vary. You'll get mediums of a really high standard, and you'll get some of not such a high standard, but we're all relevant because we all work together. We're all there really to help others and to help people. And for me, Trisha Robertson, her books are amazing, and it gives everybody an understanding of what happens when you die from her perspective as a psychical researcher, and I find that outstanding. And she's a lovely person.
Well, the person that springs to mind would be Dion Fortune. She was an occultist in the early 1900s, and she frequently travelled in the astral world, and on occasion she would come back with bruises from being in fights with bad spirits on the other side. But I know that she was very well travelled, and I think there are other stories about people travelling to her, and she would wake up and see them. So her books have a lot of information for people to, if they can get a hold of them.
Do you know who Andreas Mavromatis is?
So I've never met him. I came across his book when I was researching visual hallucinations in all the different contexts, and so that was the definitive book he wrote. I think it was in '87, I think it was. And so I use that, and I point people to that book whenever I'm asked about hypnagogic hallucinations. So that was a fantastic piece of work that I refer to. I've never met him, and he also comes up in various other sleep-related phenomena. So he's quoted in that there are some states where people have brain strokes that mean that you lose the ability to dream. And again, he's quoted in that. So he worked, I think, in a lot of these kind of sleep-related phenomena back in the 1980s.
I didn't know who he was. I do now. I haven't read his book, but I do believe he has a point. And that hypnagogia is a state. I haven't been in depth in it, so I couldn't tell you any more on that. But what I can say, from my perspective, it's maybe a trance-like state. From his, it's probably hypnagogia. But very interesting, I have to say.
So I think for those who maybe have these kind of hallucinatory experiences and are particularly distressed by them, I think the first thing I would say is that know that you are not alone. So, unlike some other forms of hallucinatory experience, we do know that hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations are actually quite common. Estimates range anywhere from 30 all the way up to 70 or 80% of the population will at some point have an experience like this. I tend to just sort of estimate and say roughly half of the population will have these experiences. But I think there are a couple of other points to keep in mind. One is that there is some research, quite recent research in fact, that's showing that liminal state that accompanies these experiences is a particularly creative mental state to be in, and it could actually generate a kind of problem-solving mentality. So there is some recent research out of the Sorbonne in 2021 that showed that people who are in this kind of liminal hypnagogic state are actually about 3 times more likely to find the solutions to a set of math problems, for instance, than when they're actually fully awake. So there is kind of some potential for a kind of creativity and problem solving. But I think personally more important than that would be that we know quite well now that much of the content, not all of it, but much of the content of these hallucinations come really from stressors and worries and anxieties of our waking lives. And so one thing I like to say is that it's perhaps more fruitful for us to focus on the emotional stimulus behind those experiences than it is to focus on our emotional reactions in the moment of those experiences.
There are a few people who described prominently getting creative ideas in that state between wake and sleep. So Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, for example, Salvador Dali, who used to use various techniques to try and gain creative insights into his work, and in fact famously the chemist who elucidated the structure of benzene. There are certainly many people who have described getting creative inspiration during that state between wake and sleep.
I think there are methods that could harness the experience and make it more beneficial. For example, the symbolic approach might be a way, I don't know, maybe trying to communicate with this image, even as scary as it can be, in a dream or in an hallucination. What is it trying to show me? right? So what is this symbol, this metaphor? Bringing new perspectives or new meanings could be creative ways of dealing with all of this. And there's another tool in Jungian psychology called active imagination, which is a guided exercise where we are not conscious but not asleep. So we are in between somehow, kind of in a meditation state of mind. We are not hallucinating or dreaming, but we are images, they come up to us. And when those images appear, we can try to communicate with them, and maybe they can be related to an hallucination that I've had or a dream that I've had. So maybe active imagination, yes, could be another method as well. But all of them, they are a symbolic approach, and the symbolic approach, I think it gives us more creative ways of seeing life as a whole.
I think the one very important thing is to learn how to protect yourself before you do anything. Now that can involve prayer, it can involve visualization. So I mentioned earlier, visualizing a ball around you. It can be, call upon angels or guides to be there and to stop anything bad from coming into your zone. You can draw a protective circle and create a sacred space as well. A lot of pagan communities do that. You can do that with the elements, salt, earth, air, water, and draw that circle around you. So you're protected, you've opened your third eye, you've raised this energy up, and then your third eye will allow you then to see into another dimension. Now you're not going to see it with the naked eye, and this was something that I just was for many years and was almost like disappointed so many times, because I'd be trying so hard to see things physically in the room, and that's not how it's going to work. What you maybe call it your mind's eye. That's where you see it. So, but you project, that image is projected out in front of you, and you can see it from there. You can use things like guided meditation. There's loads on YouTube. I've used loads on YouTube for astral projection and things like that. So that's a good way to do it as well.
I feel if this is what you're drawn to, or it's a part of you that you need to understand, what I would say is take time, log everything, make sure you write every little thing down, date everything, every experience, daytime, nighttime, whatever it may be. The only way we're going to be able to look at this in the future scientifically is for us all to have really good data, and data that is factual. And I think going forward, the whole thing around consciousness needs to be addressed. Science is now looking at it. They're literally just dipping their toe in the water of consciousness. And I really think if we can really get stuck into that, we could probably change many people, and for the better in the future. So yeah, if you're going to do it right. Don't get really wishy-washy. Be honest with what you're getting and be clear. And I think that's the way we can look at it going forward. If anyone out there is feeling like they are having mediumship abilities or psychic awareness or any of that, what I would suggest is that they find a church, a local spiritualist church. There is many around. And look for the circle. A lot of them have development circles where you will meet like-minded people. You will get help in understanding what's going on with you. And you'll also get some structure around it. to help you understand exactly what's going on with you. You won't be the only one that has been in those shoes, because many of us have. And it can be daunting going somewhere for the first time, but it's really worthwhile. A lot of our churches, there's a lot of really good guidance in there. You can also find out more about understanding from the Spiritualist National Union. They're online and they hold many courses, many circles, and even just can answer most questions if you do have any.
So the dream world is the true ontology of consciousness in some fashions, in normal day-to-day existence. We must not be afraid of it. We must accept it. If possible, to write down by having a little notebook or a tape recorder by our bed, so we can reassess what we're seeing and seeing if there's a pattern of teaching or vibrations or appearances that can give us some direction as to how our mind is overworking its problem solving at night. More often than not, these experiences everybody has seen but put away. Younger people have a better opportunity because before being orientated by a highly analytical mind, they accept the fact that there are paraphysical phenomena at work in everything. I think we need to understand that if there are situations where we can share notes with professionals in this new science of consciousness, we should go to them. I would simply ask you to read good books, consciousness of a reconnection with the higher cosmic story of creation as it is going through the human phase into new creation, requires us a sense of being in humility and purity of heart at all times. And if we have that, the negatives will pass to the side, the learning experiences will be used for the future, and we'll be better off recognizing that the schoolhouse of the soul is indeed the ontology of how we can bring and harmonize past, present, future within ourselves. And we are the good and perfect servant when we dance and sing, utilizing the beautiful music of creation within ourselves. May we be blessed, may we be joyful. For just as we think about joy and enter into the greater joy, we understand the kingdom above that comes to earth in human form. May thy kingdom come, may thy life continue on earth as it is in heaven, the deeper meaning of the divine prayer that changed humanity becomes a new reality, even in the abstract way. The bioholograph speaks to us that we're multidimensional.
And thank you so much. I couldn't make this without you guys. I feel like I've got my little safety group of like, you know, because it's definitely coming into the fore a lot more. I think people are a lot more interested into this, especially post-COVID. They're sort of like touching into this realm a bit more. And yeah, like I say, hopefully there'll be someone sitting at home going, oh my God, thank goodness, somebody else.
I mean, because that's what it was for me. I thought I looked it up once, it's exploding head syndrome, because it started out more common for me to hear noises that weren't there. And then I don't even remember what precipitated it, but I came across the Facebook group, and that the same thing for me was like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. I'm not alone. Other people experience this. And then to just hear other stories too, like, yeah, spiders, I see that too. It does. It makes a big difference. And I think it, like you said too, the stigma, I don't know that this necessarily falls under a mental health category, whether it does or not. I do. I think if you tell someone, oh, I hallucinate, they're like, oh my gosh, stay away from me. And I love telling people, like on a date, I'll be like, yeah, have I ever told you, like, I actually experience hallucinations? And they're like, what? And I love telling this story. So I love sharing it with people, and hopefully it does make a difference and helps other people realize, like, you're not alone. We all see weird stuff floating in our room.
My advice for people who have experienced hypnagogia is to please understand that you are tapping into something more than what your three-dimensional normal reality is. Enjoy it, put positive energy towards it, use a smile on your face and say, hey, I can use this information to make myself a better person. I can use this information to help humanity. And all of that, you'll get even more and more information and, we'll say, manifestations coming to you when you accept that we are much more than who you think you are.
And here's the funny thing. In taking the step back into the self, rejecting the lures of modernity, we actually managed to move forward technologically and all the rest. It was the strangest awakening ever. By having this knowledge, we gained perspective. We learned about the joys of play.